Good day to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for August 4th, 2026. Today, we're going to take a look at what is happening across the tropics, including a tropical wave which has emerged in the eastern Atlantic, which has caught the attention of some people on social media today. And we're going to take a look at whether or not the development chances are there, which I'll tell you right now, it's not looking very likely, but I am going to talk about why I think maybe this might have some implication a little bit on what to expect in general across the tropics in the Atlantic for the next 2 weeks, mainly from model signals that continue to show that something will try to develop tropical wave-wise. At some point, maybe one of these strong tropical waves that we continuously have move off the coast of Africa will try to break through, and maybe we might get something to develop here in the Atlantic in the near or somewhat eventual future. But we'll get into the nitty-gritty of all of that as we go on throughout the video. Let's start off, though, as we typically do every single time, by taking a look at the National Hurricane Center Tropical Weather Bulletin. And the latest bulletin right now, nothing much is really expected over the next 7 days. So if your standard for wondering whether or not something is going to develop is what does the National Hurricane Center say about it, you don't have any reason to really worry too much about any development that might happen here anywhere in the Atlantic, the Eastern Atlantic, or really anywhere for at least the next week. The Pacific right now also like this too. After Genevieve died out, it looks like we are calming down in the Eastern Pacific once again. We are entering another period of lull, but I'll kind of hint at this towards the very end of the video. Maybe this lull in the Eastern Pacific won't actually last so long after all, but we'll talk about that at the very end. Here's a look at the satellite image right now across the tropics in the Atlantic, and you can see that there's not really much happening here besides the aggressive tropical wave, which you can see clearly stands out here on the satellite imagery. But besides that, throughout the general tropical Atlantic, especially the MDR, things remain shut down right now. There's a lot of dry air, especially due to the plumes of Saharan air and Saharan dust, which continue to move off the continent of Africa and into the Atlantic. And of course, we have the just general dry, sinking air background state, which is being imposed on the Atlantic by the El Nino. And then elsewhere, across the subtropical Atlantic, there is a piece of energy here just to the north of the islands, to the northeast of the islands. And I do believe that this is a part of the piece of energy that the models kind of hinted at a few days ago, maybe trying to spin up off the East Coast. But the models have mostly dropped that, especially the GFS, which, if you remember, a few days ago almost looked a little bit concerning for maybe something trying to threaten the Carolinas. But since there are no more major signals hinting at development here in the southwestern Atlantic, but you never know. Sometimes, especially with these non-tropical origin systems, you can have something spin up on a dime. But the chance of that right now is not looking very likely. But let's focus in here on the eastern Atlantic to talk about this tropical wave more, because as I mentioned before, this did catch a lot of people not by surprise, but there were people talking about it on social media today, and obviously I also had my own things to say as well. But it is an interesting tropical wave here. You could definitely see that there is a defined spin with it. It's definitely one of those waves that had juice with it as it was coming off the coast of Africa. And I said this before, and I've said this with tropical waves that we've had before over the past few weeks, but I do believe, honestly, if this was a neutral or even a La Nina year, maybe this would have been a potentially developing tropical system here in the eastern Atlantic. But as I'll show you in a little bit, again, thanks to El Nino, atmospheric conditions awaiting ahead of it in the western and central MDR are likely not very favorable. But I want to show you the vorticity map here. As we like to show, vorticity generally gives us an idea of how much spin there is in the atmosphere, and that's what you really need to look at when you're trying to look at potential tropical development. And yeah, this wave here in the far eastern Atlantic, there's definitely a decent amount of vorticity associated with it. Nothing that is trying to consolidate right now, but that's kind of mainly due to the unfavorable atmospheric conditions that is waiting ahead of it. But definitely a very aggressive tropical wave, and again, not the only wave that we've had, kind of like that so far this season, but the rest of the tropics right now, vorticity-wise, not much really happening here. And you could see in general throughout the MDR, there isn't really much in terms of aggressive energy here that is trying to develop. And you do have some pockets here off the southeast coast as well. But besides that one tropical wave, the rest of the tropics generally not looking too interesting right now. And the main reason why, I talked about this yesterday, and I think we all are familiar by now, but look at the amount of dry air ahead of it. And this is not including or not factoring in, especially the Saharan air that we have in the atmosphere across the eastern and central tropical Atlantic. But this is solely just taking a look at the dryness of the atmosphere in the mid-levels. To be specific, this is the water vapor imagery. And yeah, just all of these browns, oranges, reds represent dry air that are just completely plaguing the entire eastern and central MDR here. Or especially the western and central MDR. The eastern MDR actually, by comparison, is not as dry, and obviously that's kind of helping this wave a little bit in the near term. But again, this wave is going to move on off to the west and eventually run into all this dry air here, and obviously the shear as well, which is awaiting for it further west, which is a pattern that is pretty much set in stone this year thanks to the El Nino. So more than likely, this wave is not going to develop. You're not going to have to worry about this. I could see, though, the National Hurricane Center maybe deciding to monitor or, give a yellow X to this wave for one or two bulletins, but more than likely we're not going to see development of this wave as it moves on off to the west, at least in the MDR. But you never know that maybe a few days down the line, the models pick up on its remnant energy, or whatever remnant energy will be left of it if it doesn't completely dry up once it runs into this, dry patch here in the MDR, and of course the shear as well. But sometimes, as the saying goes, especially this time of year as we get into August, you have to watch these waves fully until they just completely become nothing. And we've had cases before, as I want to remind you, of tropical waves, and sometimes our most infamous, big storm of the centuries, infamous hurricanes in hurricane history have come from tropical waves that have struggled to develop and get going in the MDR, but they end up finding more favorable conditions further west. So you can't necessarily rule that out happening at some point. Not saying that the signals are there. I want to get that notification out of the way. Not saying that the signals are there or saying that any of the models hint at that, but I'm just, throwing that idea out there just in case. But speaking of the models, what do they show here in the Atlantic over the next 2 weeks? And the main reason why I really wanted to talk about today's, tropical wave in the eastern Atlantic, partially again because it gained a lot of attention on social media this morning, but taking a look at the models here over the next 2 weeks, I've showed you this before, but they remain adamant, at least some of the ensembles here remain adamant on just something happening here in the MDR over the next 2 weeks. And I suppose that the current signal here associated with this current tropical wave, just doesn't really get going. You can see it right now in the near term. There are a few ensembles here indicating the tropical wave, but I guess, there's another tropical wave which comes off right after it, or maybe it is honestly associated with the wave here, but whatever. What I'm trying to show you is there are signals here for something over the next 2 weeks in the MDR trying to spin up. So maybe this wave is kind of hinting and telling us that, more aggressive waves will keep coming off the coast of Africa And as I've said before, and again, excuse all the notifications that I keep on getting here, but eventually you would think that one of these tropical waves would be strong enough and aggressive enough that it would be able to brave the unfavorable conditions that are plaguing the tropics right now. And especially, once again, we are now in the month of August. Climatology is generally going to start favoring the Eastern Atlantic more, or at least in the case of this year, maybe we'll have some anvils, taken off of the back of the unfavorable conditions that we have here in the Eastern Atlantic, that something would try to break through. That's all I'm trying to say, especially by taking a look at the ensembles here over the next 2 weeks. And this is the European AI, and I actually brought up the European AI twice. I was going to bring up the regular European model as well, but it too also has some signals here in the Eastern Atlantic, and that's generally what I want to show you. But does the GFS, do the operational models hint at anything happening right now? And at least according to the 12Z run today, the GFS is not really showing much developing here. It does initially show the vorticity here associated with the wave in the Eastern Atlantic, but you could see over time it just fades and kind of withers off and becomes non-existent or non-threatening in any way, shape, or form. And again, you can never rule out that these waves eventually, as they get further west, try to reignite and surprise us, and that's happened before, but it doesn't seem like the models are really hinting at that right now. And once again, probably the biggest reason why, let me show you the precipitable water here. This is just basically taking a look at the amount of water content we have in the atmosphere. And take a look here over the MDR and in general across the tropics over the next few days here. Just lots of dry air represented by these browns, and you have an even bigger surge of dry air coming off roughly in a week's time. And that's probably, coming from Saharan air. But in general, just looking at the conditions of the atmosphere, obviously you have to factor, whatever wind shear we have too, which just adds another layer of unfavorable factors. But the general characteristics of the atmosphere in general in the Eastern Atlantic is just dry and just not favorable for these waves to really take off. So as you can see here by the GFS, it just withers away and doesn't really become much. So we'll watch and we'll see whether or not these MDR signals here on the ensembles actually mean something, if they're actually hinting at any potential activity here that might happen. But the models right now still not really agreeing on any major potential. And I guess you could see also, again, around a week's time, yet another strong tropical wave moves off here into the Eastern Atlantic. So we'll continue to watch these waves and see whether or not one of them are able to develop. Nothing happening right now, though, that is, especially concerning. But again, as I said, as we continue to progress into August here, and generally climatology should ease up on, the Atlantic a little bit, and with these aggressive waves that continue to move off, you would think that one of them would break through, right? Again, we will see, though, and we will be monitoring the tropics over the next few weeks to see whether or not that does happen. I'm pretty sure something will happen eventually, though, as we get to late August and September, even though we have an El Nino, which, looking at the sea surface temperature anomaly map here, I just want to write that point home. Very strong El Nino in the Pacific right now, obviously. And obviously, the general tropical Pacific is just incredibly warm this year. And obviously, that is part of the reason why we are seeing lots of sinking air and just lots of dry air in the atmosphere. It's not just the Saharan air that we have, in the Atlantic right now, which is Saharan air is typical in any hurricane season. It's just the overall base state of the atmosphere, due to the way the weather pattern is set up globally this year, is just causing the Atlantic to be dry, which is why we are just not seeing much development right now. And just, whatever tropical wave that does move off the coast of Africa, even if it's aggressive, like, this wave is here, it's just not developing. But sea surface temperature-wise across the Atlantic right now, maybe, taking a look at the overall pattern here, sea surface temperature-wise, maybe you would think that something would happen as we get towards late August in the MDR, because sea surface temperatures right now, anomalies-wise across the tropical Atlantic, are pretty warm. And especially here in the Western Atlantic, they are very warm, and throughout the Caribbean, Northern Caribbean, and the Gulf, although the Caribbean, probably not much to be concerned about at all hurricane season-wise this year, because El Nino is going to completely shut the doors there. But at least in the MDR, sea surface temperatures are warm. And again, as I mentioned before, over the last few weeks, the Eastern Atlantic here especially has been warming quite a bit, and you kind of see that positive AMO horseshoe shape with warm waters stretching all the way from the Northern Atlantic down into the Eastern Atlantic and then hooking back into the MDR and the Eastern Atlantic here. Classic signal of a positive AMO. So we have that. So maybe that could, potentially give a little bit of oomph to the atmosphere to fight back against this El Nino a little bit as we get towards the peak of the hurricane season, although I still don't think we're going to see anything wild. We're probably not going to have an active season still, but you would just think that something would happen here as we get further and further into August and closer towards the peak of the hurricane season. But of course, we will see. And taking a look at the actual sea surface temperatures, the actual skin of the surface of the ocean right now, sea surface temperature-wise, the general MDR is warm, especially here in the southeastern Atlantic near the coast of Africa. Sea surface temperatures, probably where this tropical wave is definitely warm, although we still have a little bit of warming to do here, especially in the northeastern MDR, and probably, some of that is maybe being weighed down by the fact that we have a lot of Saharan air out there in the eastern Atlantic right now, but the general tropical Atlantic is warm, stretching throughout most of the MDR into the Caribbean, and definitely here in the southwestern Atlantic, and the Western Atlantic in general. So, and this is only going to get warmer as we get closer and closer into the peak of the hurricane season, which obviously, technically we are already now in one of the first peak month of the hurricane season, but especially the actual peak of the hurricane season, late August and early September. As I've said before, maybe eventually one of these strong tropical waves here will persist enough that it finds more favorable conditions further to the west here, and definitely seems that way, at least with the sea surface temperatures. It's just a matter of, are atmospheric conditions going to line up, and when will they do so? But again, nothing concrete looking likely here in the Atlantic over the next week. Moving on to the Pacific, though, before we finish off here for today, let's take a look at what the model shows here in the Pacific over the next week. And nothing too solid as well. There aren't any areas that are jumping out and, a major hurricane appearing on the models, but at least as we get towards the end of the model run here, 7 days out, there's a little bit of spin that appears here on the GFS, and something that does try to consolidate. And looking at the ensembles as well, I'm not going to show it here, but I will tell you I am monitoring the ensembles of some of the models, and they're seemingly showing something here popping up in the Eastern Pacific around a week's time. So the lull that we have there right now may not last long, and we might get back to, lots of activity there, as you would expect, given that we are seeing a very strong El Nino right now in the Pacific. But maybe it's going to take a little bit of time for that to happen. And, I guess you could go with a break right now in terms of tropical activity, but what I'm trying to tell you is it's probably not going to last, especially in the Pacific, and probably the Atlantic too. Even if things are going to generally be below normal, the tropics will become active in the sense that something will happen at some point. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen, but right now, at least over the next week, nothing much to watch just yet. With that being said, though, I'm going to wrap it up for today's Tropical Weather Outlook video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would really appreciate if you like, comment, and especially if you want more videos like this, as I always say, subscribe to the channel and make sure to turn on notifications for any videos the moment I upload them. Enjoy the rest of your day. I hope all of you guys have a great one, especially if the weather is nice for you. Go outside and enjoy it, and maybe take some time off from scrolling on your phone or computer. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And again, I'll be back with more tomorrow. See you then.